Hey there, this is David Pereira from Rent to Grow Homes. I'm here with Rick Parks, a good realtor friend of mine who I've worked with in helping a client get into home ownership and avoid the NRST, the non-residential speculation tax. And today's conversation, we're going to talk about that client, we're going to talk about the situation, and hopefully answer some questions about how rent to own can be a vehicle for new Canadians to achieve home ownership. So first, let me introduce Rick Parks. Rick, do you mind giving an intro of yourself to our audience?
Thanks, David. I'm really happy to be here. I've been a realtor for about 8 years in the Cornwall area, and I work with a variety of people. I work with lots of first-time buyers, lots of investors, and over the last 3 to 4 years, more and more with newcomers to Canada. It's a great thing to do. I really enjoy helping people in Cornwall realize these dreams, and the newcomers have been a big part of business for sure. And this new tax has been a problem, but we found a solution.
We did, and let's step back for a second and kind of give a brief overview of what the tax is. So the acronym is NRST. It stands for Non-Resident Speculation Tax, and basically it's a 25% tax that applies when someone who does not have Canadian permanent residency buys a home in Ontario. Um, the reason it was introduced, there was a good reason for it originally, right? So about 5 years ago, or 5 or 6 years ago, condo prices were escalating in Toronto and Vancouver, and there were news tidbits all the time about the foreign buyers. So buyers in China, buyers in India, who were just snapping up all these condos, creating multiple bidding offers, and really kind of hurting the ability of Canadians who live here to buy a home. So what the government did was implemented this rule that basically said if you do not have permanent residency within Canada, you have to pay a 25% tax on your purchase. Now, it doesn't apply to every market on Ontario, but it applies to most of them, and it certainly applies to Cornwall, which is where Rick is based. So it's really been kind of a thorn in the side of Canadians who are coming here and expect to live, to work here, and all of a sudden they're hit with this massive cash grab for lack of a better term. Rick, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, that's exactly the case. We met I met the client that we're going to discuss today, Mario, a couple of years ago. I guess it'll be about 2 years ago. And when I met him, he had been here for a couple of years already, worked full time. His wife's working full time. They had more than enough income to justify a mortgage. They had down payment money. They had employment history. They had it all, except they weren't PR. And when it turned out that, with this new tax, what happens is a $400,000 house gets hit with $100,000 taxes. That's just not reasonable. Even if you had the money, I'm not sure why you'd want to pay that. But for most people trying to buy a first house in a new country, they don't have a spare 100,000. It just doesn't work. But the rent to own, we found a really acceptable workaround for it, so that these people that are new to Canada can buy a home and start living their dream.
What was Mario's reaction when he found out about the NRST?
He was not a happy camper
Yeah, I can
because
imagine.
he was totally unaware of it, and I guess it was a new enough tax at that point in time that I wasn't totally up on the rules for it either, and we were both pretty surprised when we couldn't buy a house for him.
Yeah, because if I remember correctly, he'd been approved for a mortgage by RBC, and then when they were going through the process of closing, that's when a lawyer, I think, flagged it to both of you, right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. I recommended a lawyer to him, and the lawyer said, came back to both of us and said, "You can't buy a house." What do you mean you can't buy a house?
And that's the other thing that I think surprised me about the rule is it's not something you can sort of it's a tax that you have to pay up front. So it's not something you can like spend over time or pay off over time. There's no
Right.
amortization of it. It's literally 25%. So in the case you brought up 400K house, it's $100,000 you have to pay to the government. I think it's like 2 weeks before closing or at closing, but right around when you close.
Right.
And as you said, like most immigrants who come to the country and are looking for a house at the 400K mark, they don't have 100K just sitting around.
Well, not a spare 100K for sure. You know,
Right.
whatever they've got, they're going to use for their house.
Yeah.
It's a brutal tax.
It is. So anyway, as you said, we found a workaround. So the workaround, just to kind of connect the dots between rent to own and the NRST. So rent to own, for those of you who don't know, is basically an arrangement where you're basically buying time to build up your down payment, build up your credit, or in this case, achieve your PR status. And so what Mario knew was that, hey, I don't have 100K, but I need to buy a home because where I'm living with my family right now and my children, it's not that safe. And I don't want to be here for the next 2, 3 years. And so his sort of short-term needs were find a safer place and ideally plant some roots, right? If I remember correctly, he's got 3 kids, ages of like 9 to 14 or so.
That's
Um,
exactly the case.
right? And so he's looking for good schools, he's looking for safe areas, and he doesn't want to be worried about the landlord selling, and then he has to go find a new place as a renter. So when you're a dad, you're a husband, you're a father, 3 kids, stability is one of the things that you want to bring to your family, and that was certainly one of the things I remember when I talked to him that was very critical to him.
That's absolutely the case. You know, and he was renting a place. It wasn't a bad place, but the rent was fairly excessive,
Yep,
which is the case these days.
yep,
And you know, it's just wasted money, isn't it?
yep.
You know, you're not
So
building any equity. You're not creating the pride of home ownership.
yeah, and he hated not building equity. I remember the fact that he just like lamented the fact that he had to like every month pay rent and there was nothing to show for it. And so part of the reason I think he was very much enamored by the rent to own idea is you are building equity. And so again, sorry, I didn't explain it the first time. Rent to own is basically it's a we did with him we did a 2 year term, and so we approved him, so that my team from Rent to Grow Homes, we approved Mario. We assigned a budget. His budget was 400,000. Mario went out with Rick, his realtor, to look for places, and the max budget was 400K. They found a place. I think we were able to get it for 390. We've already agreed on the exit price. So Mario is in a 2 year term. His term finishes this September. He is going to buy the house back from the investor at 435. It's basically 5% compounded each year. So an investor buys the house up front. Each month, Mario is paying rent, but this additional savings amount, which is how he builds equity. And at the end of 2 years, he's spent time building his credit. His wife's been building her credit. I know they're both over 700 now, so there's no problems there. He's been fantastic with payments. He's been making his payments. His down payment is in great shape. And he's just on the verge of getting his PR card. So by September, everything should be clean. And at that point, it is basically a private transaction from the investor to Mario. It's a legal transaction. Lawyers are involved. There's still paperwork and deed is transferred and all that good stuff. But it's a private transaction, and he's already living in the house. So there's a ton of benefits for him and his family, mostly the stability.
Yeah, absolutely. And living in the house that's going to be yours just allows all kinds of things, right? I mean, if you're a tenant, you're not going to waste a whole lot of money doing upgrades.
Yep.
Uh, but in this case, I mean, he was happy to go do all kinds of things. You know, they created a master bedroom in the basement. The basement was only partially finished. You know, he put a new deck on the house. He put a new fence on the house, around the house. You know, it's absolutely his house. No question about it.
And I think that kind of brings up the tenant mindset versus the owner mindset. Would you agree that Mario and his family very much have the owner mindset?
Oh, absolutely. You know, I mean, I'm a landlord myself. And, you know, I have people call me when there's a light bulb broken, as silly as that sounds. But, you know, Mario's looking after that house absolutely like it was owned. Like I said, you know, he built a new bedroom, built a new deck, built a new fence. Tenants don't do that.
And I think the reason, I mean, again, he wanted something nice for his family, and he's handy, and so he was able to make it nice. But the other nice thing is he gets to realize the boost in equity, right? So he bought the house, or we bought the house for him at 390. He's going to buy it back at 435. But with all the work he's done and then the natural increase in equity that's occurred over time in Cornwall, I wouldn't be surprised if it got appraised for 460, 470, just because it's a much better house today than it was 2 years ago.
Absolutely, that's true, and I mean, so even if it's as low as say 470, and he's buying it for 435, he's got an instant $35,000 in extra equity.
Yep,
So I mean, his last 2 years, yes, he's still been paying some rent, but he's also made $35,000 in equity.
exactly.
But you don't do that as a tenant.
No, no, exactly. So I mean, I went to see him a couple of weeks ago when I was in Cornwall. He's excited. He loves showing off the place and kind of the most recent additions he's made to the house. And he's excited to take over. You mentioned you're a landlord, I'm a landlord as well. And we've got some great tenants, but there's a difference between tenant mindset and owner mindset. And with Mario and all of our rent-to-own clients, there's pride in home ownership and there's pride in achieving buying a home, and every one of them are motivated to kind of get to that finish line.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a great product.
Good. Let's talk about sort of the realtor experience. Were there a lot of differences from your perspective in terms of the whole process to purchase the home with Mario?
Not really. I mean, it was a little foreign at first because, I'm taking one family shopping, and yet they're not signing the documents because they're not actually purchasing the home, the investor is.
Right.
So I don't think I actually ever met the investor. We had a phone conversation. We did most of it by email. Most of the communication was facilitated by you and your group.
Yep.
Uh, so based on that, there was literally no difference. After I get used to the fact that but we had a budget, so we go shopping, we find the right house. The investor obviously had to approve it, but
Yep.
he'd already approved a spend of 400,000. So when we found a decent home in a decent neighborhood at 390, it's a done deal.
Yep. Yeah, and so part of my job as a rent to own operator is to make sure that I'm making the life of the realtor as easy as possible. And so bringing them an investor who's already vetted, has their financials kind of all together. And then, as Rick said, I'm kind of setting up a group chat to make sure things are moving, signatures are happening. And when you're in the offer process, things move quickly. You have to sign back sometimes if you're in a bidding war. Things just happen. And you want to make sure that the investor who is 100% passive is still very present and can sign things when they need to and is aware. Rick, the other thing you brought up was we found a great home in a great area, and the investor was comfortable with the budget, but we still had an inspection. And we want to make sure that whatever we bought was a good home. And so, if you remember correctly, I remember you and I have the same inspector, Sean Cannell. He's phenomenal. Sean did the inspection for us. You looked at it. I looked at it. Mario looked at it, and the investor looked at it. And there was no major concerns. I think there was one or couple of questions that Sean was able to explain, and from there we just moved on.
Well, that's true. I mean, an inspection is a necessity in this business. I would never ever recommend to a client that they buy a house without an inspection. At some points during COVID, it was almost a necessity, but it's not a good idea ever. And the inspection report can be a little intimidating, but when you have somebody like Sean who knows how to explain it properly, it's not. It turns out to be a 40-page document,
Yep.
and it's got pictures and diagrams and
Yep.
notes. But like I said again, having somebody like Sean that can explain it properly and not scare customers is makes it worthwhile. I tell people that basically, unless there's something major wrong with the house, that inspection report is like a maintenance list for the next couple of years.
Yep.
But of course, that has to safeguard, in this case, instead of just a buyer, and we have to safeguard the investor as well.
Absolutely.
Necessary part of the process.
Yep. As an investor, or sorry, as a realtor, so you kind of talked about the investor piece. Was there anything else that was unique or different from your perspective?
I don't believe so. I mean, it really went just as smooth as any other transaction.
Good.
After
Um,
we got the initial thing set up and figured out that we couldn't buy it on our own.
yep. Excellent. All right. So as we're wrapping up here, Rick, you work with a lot of newcomers to Canada. Do you want to maybe just take a minute here to kind of like provide them with a just sort of last words of advice in terms of like how to think about this, how to approach it, what they can do?
Well, I really do think it's an excellent program for these people. You know, um, and not just newcomers to Canada. There's others that just don't qualify for a mortgage right now, but have some down payment. There's a variety of reasons for that. There could be, a bankruptcy due to a failed business or due to health issues or a divorce or anything else, and that's going to prevent them from buying a home.
Sure.
But, so that then the alternative is, do we burn money paying rent, or is there another way? And this is the other way. And, if you can't buy a house now for any of those reasons, or in particular, the newcomer reason of the NRST tax, then, your choices are to keep spending rent and you'll get nothing for it, or spend a little bit more than normal rent, pick the house that you really wanted anyway, and you get to move into it and treat it like your own tomorrow. And, based on the appreciation that you tack onto the deal, there's almost instant equity almost every single time. The market's been pretty solid in Cornwall. We didn't take the big nosedive that Vancouver and Toronto took. And the prices are holding steady here, and they're going to continue to appreciate. And based on that, it's absolutely a win-win-win.
So I strongly believe in that last comment about Cornwall continuing to appreciate. I had this conversation earlier today with someone who has been seeing all the I'm going to call it FUD, FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt news about Canada home prices crashing in the next 2, 3 years. And I do think in certain markets that likely will happen. There is a bubble that has occurred with the Canadian housing market. So I wouldn't be surprised if Toronto goes down 10%, Vancouver goes down. Those markets that really went up fast and went up high naturally will taper off and start coming down. Cornwall does not fall into that category. Cornwall is incredibly affordable still. We're still talking about homes that are safe for families at the $400,000 mark. And at some point, if crashes occur in other cities and people are starting to lose their homes, they're going to start looking at markets like Cornwall. So I only foresee growth happening, more population. We know there's more employment happening there. So I'm pretty sure that Cornwall will be able to avoid the bubble and probably continue to kind of go up at a steady pace.
That's absolutely the truth. All you have to do is look at replacement cost. And, a $400,000 house here is going to have a replacement tag on it of somewhere around 650.
Right.
So, until we get to that 650 mark, the only direction that housing prices in Cornwall can go is up.
Yeah,
It's still we're still selling below replacement cost.
that makes
All
sense.
all these years later, and as long as that's the case, then there's only one direction for it to go. That doesn't mean we won't have a bad year,
Sure.
but a bad year isn't going to be a 25% decline. It's going to be
Exactly.
maybe going to be a 2% appreciation or
Right.
a three
Or
percent
flat or something.
or
Yeah.
flat. But we're never gonna see a problem here with that.
I agree with you. So, Rick, as we wrap up, how do people reach out to you? Can you provide your contact details?
Yeah, I'm pretty easy to find. Um, my phone number is 613-551-2866, and my website is parksrealestategroup.com.
Excellent. And for those of you interested in rent to own as a potential solution, I can be found on Instagram or on Facebook, Rent to Grow Homes. And our website is renttogrowhomes.com. If you have any questions, please reach out. And I'm happy to help you. And if you are looking for a place and looking for a realtor in Cornwall, I would strongly recommend you get in touch with Rick Parks. Thanks for joining us and have a great day.